She thought she could outsmart me in front of everyone. But I had a secret up my sleeve that turned the whole party upside down. Trust me, you won't see the twist coming. Watch till the end to find out what left everyone speechless. You know, there's a certain sixth sense you develop after 60 years on this earth. It's not quite psychic, but it's close call at mom radar. It's that little tingle at the back of your neck that tells you when something's about to go sideways, especially at family gatherings. And let me tell you, my radar was blaring like a tornado siren the moment I saw my daughter-in-law. Jessica walked through my front door that Sunday afternoon. She had her mother in tow, a woman who, bless her heart, has the personality of a wet mop and the charm of a tax audit. You know, that type always judging, always sighing, always finding something to complain about. Even if it's just the weather or the way you cut your carrot sticks. The house was already buzzing with the usual chaos. My son David was trying to keep the kids from turning the living room into a wrestling ring while my husband, Frank, was in the kitchen pretending to help but mostly just taste testing the deviled eggs. The air was thick with the smell of roast chicken, laughter, and the faintest whiff of impending doom. I'd spent the whole morning making sure everything was perfect, table set, wine chilled, and not a dust bunny in sight. But as soon as Jessica and her mother arrived, I felt a chill that had nothing to do with the air conditioning. Jessica breezed in, all smiles and hugs, but I could tell something was off. She was wearing her special occasion perfume, the one she only breaks out when she's about to ask for something big. Her mother, meanwhile, gave me a once-over that made me feel like I'd shown up to my own party in a bathrobe. I plastered on my best hostess smile and ushered them into the dining room where everyone was already gathered around the table, swapping stories and laughing about old times. We'd barely made it through the first round of appetizers when Jessica suddenly reached into her oversized purse and pulled out a thick stack of papers. She slapped them down in front of me with a little too much enthusiasm, sending a few crumbs flying. "Sign these, Mom," she said, her voice dripping with honey. "It's just some paperwork for the apartment." Now, I may be in my 60s, but I wasn't born yesterday. I've seen enough Lifetime movies to know that just some paperwork is never just paperwork. I picked up the stack and started flipping through, my heart thumping a little faster with each page. Legal jargon, fine print, endo. Would you look at that, my name in bold letters right next to the words transfer of ownership. My apartment. The one I'd worked my whole life to pay off. The one with the creaky floors and the sunroom, where I drink my morning coffee. She wanted me to sign it over to her. And as if that wasn't enough, there was a little note at the bottom about a monthly support payment of $2,500. For what? Emotional damages from having to visit me once a week. I nearly choked on my cheese puff. I looked up at Jessica, who was smiling at me like a cat that had just cornered a mouse. Her mother was watching me too, her lips pursed so tight I thought they might disappear altogether. The whole table had gone quiet, everyone sensing that something was up. Even the kids stopped bickering for a moment, their eyes wide as they watched the groan dash up stot. I took a deep breath and set the papers down. "Jessica," I said, keeping my voice as calm as I could, "I'm not signing anything until I've had a chance to read it over." She leaned in, her smile faltering just a bit. "Oh, come on, Mom. It's just a formality. You know we're family. We'd never do anything to hurt you." I raised an eyebrow. "Funny. That's exactly what people say right before they do something to hurt you." There was a tense silence. I could feel everyone's eyes on me, waiting to see what I'd do next. My son looked uncomfortable, shifting in his seat, while Frank gave me a little nod of encouragement from across the table. Jessica's mother cleared her throat, clearly itching to jump in, but I held up a hand. "Jessica," I said, my voice steady, "I appreciate everything you do for the family. But I'm not signing over my apartment. And I'm certainly not paying you $2,500 a month. If you need help, we can talk about it. But this isn't the way." Her face turned a shade of red I hadn't seen since the time she caught her son drawing on the walls with permanent marker. She opened her mouth to argue, but I cut her off. No, Jessica, I'm not signing anything. For a moment, the only sound in the room was the ticking of the old grandfather clock in the hallway. Then, as if on cue, Jessica's mother let out a dramatic sigh, and Jessica snatched the papers off the table, her hands shaking. The tension in the room was thick enough to cut with a butter knife. I glanced around the table, trying to lighten the mood. Well, I said, forcing a smile, who's ready for dessert? Everyone laughed a little too loudly, grateful for the distraction. But I could feel Jessica's eyes burning into me, and I knew this wasn't over. Not by a long shot. As I passed around the pie, I couldn't help but wonder what she'd try next and whether my mom radar would be enough to see it coming. But one thing was certain. I wasn't about to let anyone bully me out of my home, no matter how many papers they shoved in front of me. And as I watched Jessica and her mother whispering furiously at the end of the table, I made a silent promise to myself. This was one battle I was going to win. You'd think I'd just told her I was donating the entire family fortune to the neighbor's cat. Whiskers, the way Jessica reacted when I calmly said, "No, I'm not giving your mother the car." Her face turned redder than my Aunt Linda's. Beet salad, the one that stains your tongue for 2 days and could probably be used as industrial paint. She shot up from her chair so fast, her napkin flew across the room like a surrender flag. The living room went dead silent. Even the dog. Buddy, normally a furry vacuum cleaner who eats anything that hits the floor, froze mid-chew with a rubber taco hanging from his mouth. Jessica pointed at me with a trembling manicured finger and shrieked, "How dare you say nitrogen monoxide to my mother, you stupid woman!" Like she was auditioning for a daytime soap opera. I blinked once, maybe twice, trying to process how we got from a simple boundary to a full volcanic eruption. Before I could take a breath, she grabbed the nearest Play-Doh, flimsy off-white. One from the dollar store, the kind that claims to be microwave safe, but melts at the mere whisper of heat. And she hurled it at my head. Wham! It didn't hurt much, honestly. I've taken harder hits in Zumba, especially when Margaret in the front row forgets her spatial awareness and throws her elbows like she's directing airport traffic. But the shock of it? Oh, that was something. I stood there trying to figure out if I should be more offended about the assault or the fact that she used my least favorite plate. The room gasped in collective horror. Paul, my son, finally looked up from his phone long enough for his eyes to widen like 2 saucers. "Jessica, what are you doing?" he stuttered. But it came out weak, like he wasn't even sure whose side he was supposed to be on. Jessica, panting dramatically, tossed her hair back as if she had just performed a heroic act. Not committed a misdemeanor at Sunday brunch? She disrespected my mother. She yelled again, as though repeating it at a higher volume would somehow make it sane. Her mother, by the way, was sitting there eating potato salad and pretending she wasn't silently enjoying the spectacle. She raised her eyebrows at me like, "Well, why did you say no?" But the worst part, the absolute cherry on top of this deranged Sunday, was what happened next. Jessica snapped her fingers at me. Actually snapped. Like I was some sort of servant in a medieval castle. "Clean that up," she ordered. Not asked, ordered. I stood there thinking, did I give birth to the man who married this creature? And did I really raise him to watch me get a plate broken on my head and then let his wife treat me like hired help? Buddy the dog, bless his confused soul, walked up to the broken pieces, sniffed them, and then looked back at me as if to say, "You're not seriously doing this, right?" But apparently, in that moment, I was. Because as much as I wanted to walk out of that house forever, slam the door like a teenager fed up with everyone, and drive straight to a beach somewhere, I instead bent down and began picking up the shards because that is what decades of being a mother teaches you, to clean up messes you didn't make. My hands shook a little, partly from adrenaline, partly from anger so deep it felt like it was boiling behind my ribcage. I could feel the sting of humiliation prickling behind my eyes. Not the kind that makes you cry, but the kind that wakes. Something up inside you. Something old. Something tired. Something done. Jessica strutted back to her chair with the triumph of someone who believed she won. Paul whispered, "Mom, maybe just let it go," in the same tone someone might use to calm a wild animal. I didn't look at him. I couldn't. If I did, I might have said every truth I'd swallowed for years. Instead, I quietly gathered the pieces, each little shard of glass feeling like its own insult. I carried them to the trash can, dropped them in, and took a long breath. The kind of breath that feels like the moment before a storm breaks. And then Jessica, as if the day needed more nonsense, muttered under her breath, but loud enough for everyone to hear. Maybe if she knew how to act, things like, "This wouldn't happen." That was it. The floor didn't shake, but I did. Something inside me, something that had patiently tolerated, forgiven, endured, finally split clean in half. I stood up slowly, wiped my hands on my slacks, and said in the calmest voice I have ever used in my entire life, "I'm going home." No yelling, no dramatic exit, no slamming doors. Just a simple sentence that apparently threatened Jessica more than a thrown plate ever could, 'cause her eyes went wide as if I had just announced her credit score on live television. "Where are you going?" Paul asked, jumping to his feet, like he finally remembered I was his mother and not a piece of furniture. "To my house," I said, "where I don't have to be screamed at or assaulted." Jessica scoffed. "Co, please, you're being dramatic." "Jessica," I replied, "you threw a plate at my head." "It was plastic," she argued. "It was porcelain," I corrected. "Cheap porcelain, but still porcelain." And then, without waiting for another excuse, without waiting for anyone to stop me, I grabbed my purse, gave Buddy a pat on the head he deserved better too, and walked out that front door. The cold air hit my face, and for the first time in a long while, I felt something I had forgotten how to feel. Power. And that was the moment, walking down the steps of my son's house with a welt on my forehead and dignity in my pocket, that I knew this wasn't the end of something. 'Twas the beginning. As I sat there at the table, brushing the last of the cake crumbs and a few stray shards of plate out of my hair, I couldn't help but let a little smile creep across my face. The room was still thick with tension, the kind that makes you want to check your blood pressure and pour yourself a second glass of wine. Jessica was standing over me, her chest heaving, her face blotchy with anger and embarrassment. Her mother, who had spent the last hour acting like the Queen of Sheba, now looked like she'd just seen a ghost. My son, David, was frozen in place, his phone halfway to his ear, as if he was debating whether to call 911 or just order a pizza and hope for the best. The rest of the family sat in stunned silence, forks poised midair, eyes darting between me and Jessica like they were watching the final round of a heavyweight boxing match. But I wasn't rattled, not even a little. Because you see, Jessica had no idea what I'd done the day before. She thought she had me cornered, that I was just some gullible old woman she could bully into signing away everything I'd worked for. She thought a little intimidation, a few crocodile tears, and a dramatic scene at the family party would be enough to get her hands on my apartment and a nice fat monthly check. But what she didn't know, what nobody at that table knew, was that I'd spent the last week quietly making sure she'd never get her way. I leaned in, lowering my voice so only those closest could hear, and said, "You have no idea what I just did." The words hung in the air like a thundercloud. Jessica's face went from red to white in a heartbeat. Her mother's jaw dropped so fast I thought she might need a chiropractor. David's phone slipped from his hand and clattered onto his plate, splattering mashed potatoes everywhere. Even Frank, who'd been trying to stay out of the line of fire, looked up from his pie with wide eyes. I let the silence stretch for a moment, just long enough for everyone to start squirming. Then I sat up a little straighter, brushed off my blouse, and gave Jessica a look that said, "You might want to sit down for this." She didn't move, so I continued, my voice calm and steady. Yesterday, I went to see my lawyer. You know, the one you always say charges too much for simple paperwork? Well, he helped me set up a trust for my apartment. That means it's no longer in my name, and it's certainly not in yours. In fact, the only people who have any say over it are me and the trustee. And let me tell you, the trustee is a lot less forgiving than I am. The color drained from Jessica's face. Her mother let out a little gasp, clutching her pearls like she was auditioning for a soap opera. I could see the wheels turning in Jessica's head as she tried to process what I'd just said. She opened her mouth to argue, but I held up a hand. Oh, and one more thing, I added, unable to resist twisting the knife just a little. About that $2,500 a month you wanted. I thought about it, and I decided you were right, someone should be getting that money. So I set up a monthly donation to the local animal shelter. In your name, of course. I figured if anyone deserves a little extra love and care, it's those poor animals. At least someone's getting fed. For a moment, nobody said a word. The only sound was the soft hum of the refrigerator and the distant barking of a neighbor's dog. Then, slowly, the mood in the room began to shift. My granddaughter, who'd been hiding under the table with her tablet, peeked out and giggled. My sister-in-law let out a snort of laughter, quickly covering her mouth with her napkin. Even Frank couldn't hide his grin as he reached over and squeezed my hand. Jessica, on the other hand, looked like she might explode. Her hands were clenched into fists, her eyes wild with disbelief. "You can't do that," she sputtered, her voice rising an octave. "That apartment should be mine. I deserve it after everything I've done for this family." I shrugged, feeling lighter than I had in years. "Well, Jessica, life isn't always fair, but it is funny sometimes, isn't it?" I glanced around the table, meeting the eyes of each family member in turn. I've spent my whole life taking care of this family, making sure everyone had what they needed. But I'm not about to let anyone, family or not, take advantage of me. Not now, not ever. Jessica's mother tried to jump in, but I cut her off with a look. "And as for you, Margaret, maybe next time you'll think twice before encouraging your daughter to pull a stunt like this. I may be old, but I'm not stupid. I'm certainly not helpless." The tension finally broke, replaced by a wave of relief and, dare I say, a little bit of admiration. My son looked at me with a new respect, and even the grandkids seemed to sense that something important had just happened. I stood up, smoothing my skirt, and announced, "Now, who wants coffee? I think we could all use a little pick-me-up after that performance." As I poured the coffee and passed around the desserts, I felt a sense of peace settle over me. I'd stood my ground, protected what was mine, and sent a clear message to anyone who might try to push me around in the future. And as I watched Jessica and her mother gather their things and slink out the door, I couldn't help but smile. Sometimes the best revenge isn't anger or bitterness. It's a well-timed trust fund and a donation to a good cause. And maybe, just maybe, a little bit of cake in your hair. The party ended faster than you can say family drama. 1 minute the house was filled with the clatter of dishes and the hum of conversation. And the next, Jessica was storming out the front door, her mother trailing behind her like a particularly grumpy shadow. I watched them go, their heels clicking angrily down the walkway, and I couldn't help but feel a strange sense of relief. My son David just shook his head, muttering something about needing a vacation and looking like he'd just survived a tornado. The rest of the family sat in stunned silence for a moment, as if waiting for the next act in the circus. But when it became clear that the show was over, everyone seemed to exhale at once. The tension that had been hanging over us like a rain cloud finally lifted, and the house felt lighter, almost as if it had been holding its breath right along with me. I started gathering up the plates well. The ones that hadn't been smashed, any way on as I did. I realized I felt lighter, too. Not just because the drama had finally left the building, but because I'd finally stood up for myself in a way I hadn't in years. It's funny, isn't it? We spend so much of our lives trying to keep the peace, smoothing things over, biting our tongues for the sake of family harmony. But sometimes, standing up for yourself means breaking a few plates and, maybe a few expectations, too. I'd always thought of myself as the peacemaker, the one who kept everyone together. But that day, I learned that sometimes the best way to keep your family strong is to show them you're not someone to be pushed around. As I wiped down the table, I caught a glimpse of myself in the hallway mirror. There I was, a little older, a little wiser, and with a few more laugh lines than I remembered. But there was something else in my reflection, too, a spark I hadn't seen in a long time. Maybe it was pride, or maybe it was just relief. But whatever it was, it felt good. I poured myself a cup of coffee and sat down in my favorite chair, letting the warmth seep into my bones. The house was quiet now. The only sound, the ticking of the old clock in the hallway and the distant laughter of my grandchildren playing. In the backyard, for the first time in a long time, I felt at peace. David came in a few minutes later, looking sheepish. He sat down across from me and ran a hand through his hair. "Mom, I'm sorry about all that," he said, his voice low. "I had no idea Jessica was going to pull something like that. I should have stopped her." I reached across the table and squeezed his hand. "It's not your fault, honey. We can't control what other people do. We can only control how we respond. And today I decided I wasn't going to let anyone take advantage of me, no matter who they are." He nodded, a small smile tugging at the corners of his mouth. "I'm proud of you, Mom," he said. "You handled it better than I ever could have." Okay. We sat there for a while, just enjoying the quiet. Eventually, the rest of the family started to trickle back in, drawn by the promise of dessert and the knowledge that the storm had passed. My sister-in-law brought out the pie. And soon the kitchen was filled with laughter and the clinking of forks against plates. The kids came running in, faces sticky with ice cream, and for a moment, everything felt normal again, maybe even better. The normal dot later that night, after everyone had gone home and the house was finally still. I sat down with a glass of wine and thought about everything that had happened. I realized that, for all the chaos and hurt feelings, I wouldn't have changed a thing. Standing up for myself wasn't easy. It never is, especially when it comes to family. But it was necessary, and in the end, it brought us all a little closer together, even if it meant losing a few plates along the way. So ladies, let me ask you, have you ever had to put your foot down with family? Did it get messy, or did you come out stronger? I know I'm not the only one who's had to draw a line in the sand, and I'd love to hear your stories. Maybe you had to say no to a pushy relative, or maybe you finally spoke up after years of keeping quiet. Whatever your story is, I hope you know you're not alone. We all have our breaking points, and sometimes reaching them is the best thing that can happen to us. If you've enjoyed this wild ride, don't forget to hit that subscribe button for more real-life stories, laughs, and a little bit of wisdom. From someone who's been there, done that, and still has the plate charts to prove it. Life after 60 is full of surprises, some good. Some not so much, but one thing's for sure. We're stronger than we think. And we're never too old to stand our ground. So here's to all the women out there who refuse to be pushed around, who know their worth and who aren't afraid to break a few plates if that's what it takes. And if anyone tries to tell you otherwise, just send them my way. I've got a few stories and maybe a few leftover plates I'd be happy to share.